You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello and welcome to round 4 here at week 1, season 4 of the Eternal Tournament Series. I am Truedawn. As always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, LocoPojo.
Welcome, welcome. We're seeing a really nice control matchup today. TGP midrange versus Visage Control. Rewind is running TGP midrange, and unclimainfame is running Visage Control. We'll endeavor to get that name right anytime that I'm not calling him unclimainfame.
I'll probably be calling him Infamy from here on out, but his Visage deck is really interesting. It is much like a very controlling deck, although it's missing a lot of the traditional elements you would expect to see in a deck that's trying to be this controlling with Stronghold Visage. There is no Channel the Tempest. There is no Staff of Stories to go with the Stronghold Visage. There's no Excavate to bring back large Swords of the Sky King or Staff of Stories from the Stronghold Visage. So it's a much more proactive build. There's a bunch of creatures. There's Comber Healer, Night Justice Seraph, Great Parliament. So while it is slanted towards the controlling end, it's more so a mid-range deck.
Yep, you do have those double Celestial Omens, which are a pretty key indicator of a very slow deck that doesn't expect to see a lot of aggressive tempo. We're going to see if Rewind's deck can take advantage of those long pauses and turns to basically just roll out the more aggressive style with Cerso, Sandstorm Titan, Night Chancellor Seraph, and False Prince. Should be a lot of really aggressive stuff in the middle of the game that will be a lot more resistant to Harsh Rule and some of the other answers that Infame might have.
Yeah, Rewind definitely is the beatdown in this matchup. He's a lot more proactive. Things like Awakened Student, False Prince, as you said. Stand Together is super important to insulate from the harsh rules. He does have some cards that are going to be underwhelming here, like the Crystallize, the Vanquish, the Frost. They're not dead cards, but there are very few creatures present in Infamy's deck, and very few of them are actually going to be able to block a lot of Rewind's threats profitably anyway.
Yeah, it looks like the sideboard might be a little tricky for Rewind too. There's not that many extra cards that he can cycle in against a control archetype. He's got the 3 decays, which will be helpful against the relic weapons. All in all, it should be fairly interesting. But we're going into game 1 now. Rewind opening with a hand with 2 Awakened Students in it.
Yeah, this is what you like to see. He gets to make 2 3/3s on turn 3, so it should be a pretty fast start for him. We'll see if Infame is going to be able to contend with all of this early pressure.
Yeah, we have the Seek powers, we have the Permafrosts. Rewind's definitely going to be able to generate a lot of early pressure, but now he needs to draw gas. He's looking for a little bit more to balance out his hand and give him something to play in the early game.
Well, Desert Marshal's an excellent draw there from Infame. It's like being able to make sure this Awakened Student doesn't grow, try to trade with it. So that card's essentially dead. Now he can play his other Awakened Student, make it a 3/3. Maybe that one will go the distance. But yeah, the first one ends up trading for the Desert Marshal.
He has essentially stymied all of Rewind's aggression, and those Eyes of Winters, which I think previously went unnoticed, are definitely going to be really, really difficult cards to deal with in these matchups. Infame can just continue to lock down the Awakened Students and then save his Harsh Rules and Vanquishes for bigger threats that are a lot more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, although I think that this Permafrost is likely not to get a better target. Like, it forces through 4 damage. Maybe the 4 damage doesn't matter, though, because this guy is not attacking anyway, the Awakened Student, because the Survivor just got locked down by the Eye of Winter. It is worth noting, though, that Infame has not hit a power drop, and again misses it that turn. So I do think pressuring them to keep using the Eye of Winter is worth it, and you do that by permafrosting this Awakened Student and start shipping in for damage.
Yeah, Rewind has a very good board right now, and he's sitting on the Stand Together. Meanwhile, Infame is basically just waiting, trying to get something better going on. Since he hasn't actually hit 4, he can't threaten Harsh Rule, which means that Rewind is free to play out his entire board and be very, very aggressive.
Yeah, he could definitely play Cerso this turn. Traditionally, you want to leave down Stand Together this late in the game, but Harsh Rule is not coming next turn, even if Infame does draw a power. So now he's going to get to untap with Stand Together up with this board, and it should be smooth sailing from here on out.
Yeah, it looks like we have the Eye of Winter on the Cerso. That's a pretty big deal. And then from there, Infame gets to set up about 12 damage. He takes about 6 here, and then if he can get a Harsh Rule off, that would be ideal. But Rewind's still sitting on the stand together. This looks like it's probably not going to be a... it's probably going to be a quick game.
Well, there's going to be a Wasp here, because the telegraph of the new activation on the Eye of Winter, so that will take care of the Awakened Student. But still a whole bunch of stuff still in play. I would expect just a pass from Rewind, because Harsh Roll is potentially coming this next turn. But Vanquish will probably get out this stand together. Now everything has Aegis.
Yeah, looks like overall this is looking like a pretty big setup here.
Oh,
The Vanquish does happen. Yeah, he's staying alive. He doesn't really have an answer to the 2 Aegises here. I think with the Great Parliament on top, that's going to be a little bit tougher.
Yep, and we will see the game closed out by Rewind there. Just a little too much pressure. That was a very good draw from Rewind. A lot of the stuff you want to see early. Several Awakened Students, stand together, protect it, Cerso. Just really good draw. Just too much for Infamy to deal with, especially missing power drops.
Yeah, so from this point forward, we have a lot of sideboarding coming in. I'm guessing the mid-range deck is going to get a bit more aggressive, and the control deck is likely probably going to want to go a little bit lower to the ground and try to find some answers to some of these mid-range threats.
Yeah, there's things in Infamy sideboard, Permafrost, 2 of those, 4 Protect, 2 Lightning Storm, 3 Decay, 2 Raid of Frogs, a Thunderstrike Dragon, and a Mistveil Drake. Of those, not a lot are exceptional. The Permafrost is obviously a reasonable removal spell. Storm probably isn't going to come into play. The creatures are too big.
I like Thunderstrike Dragons in these matchups.
Yeah,
it's
that's
pretty
reasonable.
likely that you're not going to see the Vanquish come in on the TJP side, so having that extra value and also something to block Sandstorm Titans and Parliaments is a pretty good value play.
Yeah, but in general, a lot of this stuff is pretty anemic here on the side of Infamy. There's not a lot of great options for them in the sideboard, just a lot of marginal stuff. So we'll see if their deck is already reasonably well situated to deal with this kind of deck. They're very removal heavy, things like Eye of Winter, Harsh Rule. Just a draw where he stumbled there, so we'll see if he's able to recover as we quickly move here into game 2.
Yeah, unclimainfame is going to try and get a hand with a little bit more power in it this time. Rewind did have a very, very strong opening hand with those double Awakened Students. This new hand has False Prince in it, which is definitely an aggressive unit, but none of those super aggressive 2-drops to help push damage and really get the control deck on the back end. However, double stand together may end up being very useful.
Yeah, he actually, worth noting, does not have the second time to play this False Prince on curve, so he may be forced to just play the Ember Acolyte on turn 3.
And he still has to decide whether he wants double time or double justice for the Valkyrie Enforcer, so a lot of hard decisions. We get the False Prince. That's really good. Unfortunately, False Prince is not a card that can really be defended by stand together, so the cards in Rewind's hands are a little inefficiently stacked. However, there's still a lot of damage in here. There's still a lot of ways to prevent Infame from getting into a useful situation. So yeah, when we see a Vanquish here, only turning the frog into a 1/1, still leaving Rewind with a little something to push across with.
And that 1/1 might be relevant later with these stand togethers. Like, that guy could be somebody. The frog could hang around and chip in for some damage for quite some time.
I mean, it's usually more true of the Reign of Frogs with Destiny, but oftentimes if you get a frog, that's what's destined to kill you. So we have the Combrate Healer coming down to get a little bit of early defense up. Rewind has to decide whether he wants to play False Prince and get a little tempo going, or play the Amber Acolyte and save the False Prince for a turn where he has stand together.
I actually think I like playing the Amber Acolyte that turn, and the next turn False Prince stand together, and just have a huge board that's like really good to stand together.
Yeah, the main issue here is that Infame could still end up with something like a Vanquish or a Levitate, probably not a Levitate, but some sort of answer that makes the False Prince go away, even if you have stand together. And
Fun
this is a
play
really
by
smart
Rewind.
set. Yeah, I like it quite a bit. He can now decay the Stronghold's Visage
But you don't need
anytime
to.
that he wants. Yeah, there's no special rush. It's really useful to have it set up that way, but unless you see a harsh rule or something, which you're already holding up power for stand together, it seems like Rewind might be pretty well in control of this game.
Yeah, we might see Rewind use it main phase next turn when he can still leave up stand together, but you definitely don't want to take down stand together to use this decay. And we will see.
Stand together is such a bananas card in this matchup. It's really, really good that Rewind got the pair of them, because those Aegises do prevent all of the big sort of sweepy methods that Infame might actually claw himself back into this game. And since Infame probably doesn't have anything that can just whittle away at all of these small units, Rewind's early board advantage is turning into a colossal victory for him.
Yeah. And I do like just ignoring the Stronghold Visage. It's only 2 life per turn. He has other stuff to do. He can play these creatures, leave up stand together. It just doesn't matter a lot. I assume this decay mainly came in for Eye of Winter and possibly Sword of the Sky King. And it could tag Visage, but you don't need to kill Visage. You can kill it when it's convenient for you.
Yep. It does gain a pretty impressive amount of health, but I think overall it looks like Rewind has more or less the right idea with what he's doing here.
And Wasp is one of the better cards that Infamy could have access to there, getting around the stand together, dealing with one of the big threats.
Picks up another flyer. He doesn't have to play anything here. He can continue to sit on that stand together. Infamy is probably going to have to try for a harsh rule, and that'll end up being game.
Yeah, this is pretty back-raking stand together. Possible there's no backlash in the 75, so no, it's not going to be a thing. He will only succeed in killing his own Combra Healer, and he will promptly concede the game. Yep. So good showing there by Rewind. Pretty dominant performance.
Shape, but yeah, definitely strong showing from Rewind and a very, very quick game. I'm guessing we'll be going into some sort of backup game pretty shortly.
Yeah, I would expect so. So we can also just go over what happened. The Visage deck is I've played around with some iterations of this, and Stronghold Visage is very powerful. It is very good inevitability. It gains a lot of life over time, but you need to be able to take off turn 5 to put it in play, and that requires a lot of reactive elements in your deck, and that's why I've gone away from things like Seraph and Great Parliament and Combra Healer and just gone creatureless, so you're just fully reactive and you have a lot of card draw and you can just overpower people with a large sort of Sky King later in the game. And we did see there that the more proactive cards from Infamy, like Combra Healer and stuff, and even Seraph and Parliament, didn't deal with what he was being faced with. Even if we saw a Combra Healer be largely ineffectual, and even if they drew Seraph or Parliament, those cards wouldn't have really contended with what he was facing down with. So there is certainly a cost to trying to be more proactive and trying to play down the middle of the road with decks like this.
Yep, it can be very difficult, especially since those units, if they do get removed, just leave you so open to a lot of the early aggression from those things like False Prince and Awakened Student. And this deck does have a lot of the answers that you really, really don't want to see as a very, very slow control deck. Most of the time, if you're playing for value, you're looking for decks that can stumble or decks that go a little too heavy on the aggro side so that you can Lightning Storm them or Crystallize them. In some way, just sort of massively sweep the entire board. The middle of the road approach with just a little bit of tempo. You have the False Princes, which are fairly resistant to removal. You have the Awakened Students, which are 2-drops, but end up being so big over time that it's really hard to kill them. So you have all of these options that are just tempo plays, and they tend to just really sweep the control decks off their feet.
Yeah, Standing Together is just so frequently backbreaking. It's just such a powerful tool against control decks, and that is actually a point in the favor of being more proactive, not relying so much on harsh rule, being able to actually contend on board and not rely so much on your reactive cards.
Yeah, the correct answer there is to get the backlashes up and have the 7-cost harsh rule / backlash, but that's a lot to be working through, and it's not very easy to get ahead of these sort of aggressive tempo decks.
Yep, and we do have our backup match. We have VSarius versus babamavs. VSarius is on Kalis, and babamavs is on Elysian mid-range. We are joining them in Game 2, I believe. We'll get the score to you guys in a minute. But I do believe that VSarius' deck is just a pretty baseline Kalis deck. Yeah, a lot of the stuff I'm seeing here is pretty stock. Same with babamavs. Yeah, it's just a lot of the good Elysian creatures, stuff you would expect to see, Cersos, False Prince, Sandstorm. There are a couple hunting Teriacs, which is interesting, but
I love hunting Teriacs in the mid-range archetype. I think they're really especially strong if you have Dawnwalkers, because you can use them to get the Dawnwalkers back and then attack with the Dawnwalkers in the same turn. It's a surprise 9 damage. It really, really hurts. And of course, you also have like sort of an alternate removal card that you wouldn't otherwise be able to play in a mid-range deck. I'm a big fan of those cards.
yeah, definitely. And we do see that babamavs getting ahead here early. VSarius' hand is not good. It's below average. He has nothing going on.
It's distinctly not great. If he gets a sacrifice outlet like Devour, then he can not only get a pretty significant amount of value, but he can also pick up a useful card of some kind. Oh man, that Passage of Eons. So some interesting choices here. Passage of Eons is the card that is designed to help out against Callus, so seems like VSarius is probably going to want to pick that out, but it's pretty hard to say which is best.
Yeah. And unfortunately for VSarius, even though he is behind here in this game, he did win game 1. So even if he does lose here, he will have another opportunity in game 3 to close out the series.
Dark Wasp gives him a little bit more of an option. The Elysian decks are typically a little light on silences, so Babam AVS may actually have to set up with something to get this Wisp out of the way, giving VSarius the draw.
And I think it's interesting to use the killer there. I guess there's not really better targets considering what's going on in VSarius' deck.
Okay, we have a Madness Callus. That's almost a reasonable setup.
It does kill the Carnosaur. You get to kill the 2/1, then your Callus dies to the 1/1. It's not great, but it's probably the best thing you got going on.
Yeah, he probably wants to play that rather than try to play a spider. That'll just get crystallized, and then he'll, basically be in the same situation he was, but with less health. So
yeah, I don't think he can afford to take the damage that was presented on board, especially if babamavs is going to play more things going forward. There's just too much.
I feel like he should have attacked there. I'm not 100% certain. There is the possibility that a Lightning Strike combined with an Amber Acolyte block prevents him from playing Callus, but that still doesn't seem like a bad. Yeah, seems like overall that's going to work out just fine for you. Obelisk coming down on babamavs.
Yeah, it's tongue twister. We will see the crystallize here, and that starts to clear the way for the torrent, but we do know about the lightning storm still. So I think that this board that babamavs has presented might be too much.
And it's just a little bit too much. And that False Prince is really especially just awful for him, because even with the Torrent of Spiders, that overwhelm damage does secure lethal. So VSarius calling it a day, going in for round 3.
Yeah, people will get another shot at this. He did win game 1, so his deck obviously does have game in this matchup. We could take a quick look at what both players have in the sideboard, see what they may have brought in. VSarius has things like Sabotage, Suffocate, Furnace Mage, Oblivion Spike, and Strain of Shadow. Strain of Shadow is very interesting in a deck that is pretty exclusively 1/1s. I get it because your 1/1s die for value, so you're like you want them to die a non-0% of the time.
Yep. Yeah,
so
it can be a fairly effective card. Strain of Shadow is always a little bit iffy because there are lots of cards that just have enough health to survive Stray and are still very, very scary. If Stray into Shadows were a straight neg4, it'd be a lot more threatening, but also maybe like a little too good. What we have here instead is something that often leaves False Princes alive to overwhelm you, leaves the Sandstorm Titans alive, leaves a lot of the big mid-range threats alive, and that can be really tough to deal with.
Yep. We actually saw both of babamavs' sideboard cards, Lightning Storm and Passage of the Eons, are both out of the sideboard for him. So we will be moving into game 3, and this is a much more reasonable hand on the side of VSarius.
All right, so we have some fire and a little bit of shadow. Always a good start to a Stone Scar deck, if not necessarily a Stone Scar Callus deck. We have the straight up Dark Wisp into Quarry or Assembly Line. I think there's a lot of options in VSarius' hand. It's really going to depend on where these quarries end up.
And this is certainly going to be interesting how VSarius elects to extend out, knowing his opponent has things like Crystallize and Lightning Storm. how much he wants to expose to that. Because while his creatures are largely expendable, you still do need them in play, to sacrifice yourself. You don't want your opponent killing them.
Hitting.
So we'll see how much he's able to extend.
That Vora's Favor pickup is always a really, really big swing against False Prince decks. From here, VSarius has a lot of options to play chump blocks in front of the Sandstorm Titan, but picking up the Combust is even better.
And he actually has the option to also play the Slumbering Stone and use that as a sacrifice outlet. He elects to use the Dark Wisp. It's fine either way. I can't really see a distinguishable difference, I guess.
Yeah, it's fairly reasonable. You always want it. It really feels like you want to devour the Dark Wisp for those 3 cards, but it doesn't actually make a difference.
Yeah, I guess the upside of doing the Slumbering Stone is you have a 2/2 flyer in play, and maybe that matters.
Yep, but in general, getting to deeper cards and getting to your Callus faster is probably more along VSarius' end goal. I think overall it largely doesn't make much of a difference since there's not a lot of aggression on Babam's side of the game. So Sabotage here could actually pick something up.
Ooh, both good hits.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Obelisk provides a significant amount of extra value. Scouting Party is so close to being cast, and this card is potentially a power, so he picks up the Obelisk. I think that's the wise choice. But from here, he's going to have some difficulty stealing with that Scouting Party.
Yeah, getting this Callus out is going to be very difficult, because even if VSarius was able to play Assembly Line Callus next turn if he draws a power, he gets an 8/8 Callus, kills something, and then the babamavs just cracks back in the Callus. The one thing Callus is weak to is go wide decks because it makes their Callus much worse. There are certainly situations where you can potentially sacrifice your board and then play Torch Spiders or something afterwards to provide blockers for your Callus, but that's not something VSarius is currently equipped to do.
Yeah, he can set up the Callus this turn, and I'm really surprised that he doesn't make any effort to kill that Initiate, since babamavs has clearly indicated that he has the 6 power necessary to cast the Scouting Party. So we're going to see what ends up happening here. He gets a 2/2 blocker for the Initiate, which is definitely very helpful, but that Scouting Party is still coming out.
Torrent Spiders is really good because now he does have access to the play I was talking about where he can sacrifice his board and then play Torrent, although it looks like he's content to just trade his 1/1s and then Torrent and just kind of put this Callus to the side.
Yeah, that looks pretty reasonable. He's still going to have problems with the Scouting Party, so that's something to be considering, but overall, it's not going to work out too poorly for him.
It does look like VSarius is debating piecemeal block, only blocking some of them, so he could have 2 creatures left, make a 4/4 Callus, protecting the spiders, and the 4/4 Callus still eats a bunch of the Yeti tokens. So
he's very much inviting that Scouting Party. I'm a little surprised by that. It seems like you might want to leave some tokens on the board and make him think twice about casting the Scouting Party so that you can sabotage. But a Decay pulled out of the hand. That could have been disastrous.
And the Sword Spiders does make enough spiders to at least fully trade with the Scouting Party, so maybe babamavs doesn't want to attack, but apparently does.
Yep, goes all in, gets the spiders. That's a reasonable amount of value for your spiders. Obviously, the spiders are always going to trade with the Yetis, but at the same time, this is, a decent way to clear the board and keep those Calluses from being too out of control, which certainly helps because babamavs still has the Dawnwalker and big stuff in terms of getting himself across for damage.
Yep. We'll see the Sandstorm Titan combusted here, but that still leaves the Dawnwalker in play, which is something that's going to need to be dealt with, and VSarius is pretty much on air.
Yeah, Dawnwalkers are a really rough deal against any sort of armory type deck, and that includes decks that are running things like Callus, because obviously it's 4 damage that you consistently have to deal with. There's always a unit there to block.
Oh, and there's the Hunting Teriax.
Yep, and then there's that surprise Teriax damage. VSarius' play here is Furnace Mage into Combust, which just feels awful. I think he's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, this is really bad. He's even... So, this happens, he's going to get hit down to 2.
Could be another Teriax even, yeah.
And then, what is his draw? But, yeah, there is another Hunting Teriax, just surprise lethal. And VSarius will actually go down to babamavs 2-1.
Oh, this Elysian mid-range game is for the birds. All right, so it looks like we have set up pretty well, and yeah, VSarius is now out. babamavs gets to move on. I'm having a really hard time pronouncing that as not babam with ETS attached to it, but I'm sure they are different people. So yeah, pretty excellent games there. I'm guessing we won't have a third backup match, so we'll probably be moving into the next round shortly.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting to see that Kyle deck. We've seen it a lot on stream before. When it's able to do its thing and like gets to go like Grendon Drone into 2-drop into Callus, it's pretty unbeatable. But there's also a lot of games like we saw where they just kind of like play anemic dudes, don't really have payoffs for them, flounder around. So there's a lot of give and take with that deck. It's definitely it has a floor. It has a pretty low floor.
Yeah, but yeah, it can be really rough to deal with like that sort of consistent, repeated Dawnwalker abuse, and then you saw how many different attachment destruction spells were already in that person's hand. Even with the sabotage coming out, there was always the chance that the Callus was just going to get completely wrecked by some random spell on the sideboard. It could have been pretty rough, but yeah, looks like VSarius will be knocked out, and babamavs will be moving on.
All right, and that looks like we'll do it for this round, round 4 here. We will be moving into round 5 shortly after a break. So don't go anywhere. We have several more rounds of Eternal Action and our top 8 coming later.
All right, see you folks soon.